USAID cannot be dismantled. That is an order from a federal judge for the U.S. District Court in Maryland. Joining me this morning to discuss this is our 9 News legal expert, Whitney Traylor. Whitney, good morning.
Good morning, Jordan.
All right, this is a big conversation for a lot of people across the country. Tell us about the case that prompted this ruling.
Yeah, so this was a number of USAID employees who filed this lawsuit essentially alleging that Elon Musk and Dodge, not essentially alleging that they did not have the authority to go forward with all these terminations. And they essentially were arguing that, look, he wasn't appointed. This wasn't confirmed by the Senate. He's not the head of a formal agency. And so the argument was that he didn't have the authority to do this. And essentially the judge agreed with him.
Why did the judge, rule against Musk and Doge?
Yeah, and that's what the judge said. The judge said, yeah, you weren't confirmed. You haven't been confirmed by the Senate. This was an overreach. He said it probably was a constitutional violation, because the issue here was you're looking at the separation of powers, and the executive branch can only do what Congress has apportioned it to do with respect to the money. And so that was another issue, was that Congress wasn't involved. And what they were arguing was the White House was saying publicly, Elon Musk has all this power. He's cutting the wages and all this. He's cutting the fat.
And simultaneously, you have to remember that he's kind of a contract worker when it comes to the government.
Right, exactly. But then in the pleadings, they were arguing that, oh, he's just an advisor. He's an advisor to the president. And it was actually the head of the agency, the USAID, those leaders that ultimately made the decision. And the judge just said, no, I don't buy that. And there was just so much evidence of their public statements that really came back to bite them in terms of evidentiary reasons.
Advisor being the better term there. Of course, we know he's not getting paid for his work of leading the Doge department, at least not to public knowledge. President Trump, of course, has been very critical of judges who rule against the executive branch, even calling for impeachment, we know, in some cases. What are your thoughts on these criticisms from the president?
I think these criticisms are terrible and they're misplaced, and I think it's really, really dangerous, because if you get a judge that rules against you and then you call for impeachment, essentially what you're saying is, I want this judicial branch to only rule in my favor. And so, no, I think that's a dangerous thing, because one of the fundamental tenets of the Constitution was checks and balances, a separation of powers. And the way you do that, the judiciary is the arbiter of disputes. So if we now start as a society questioning the judges, then we lose so much control. Really.
And it's important to note you're speaking specifically from a legal procedural standpoint here.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, and I'm trying to stay in my lane and not get into the political.
Right.
But this is the point of the separation of powers. I mean, the Constitution did 3 things. It limited the federal government, it gave us our individual rights, and it gave us this check and balance. And what you're seeing with President Trump, and this is not political, he's consolidating power in the executive branch by slashing certain things, by taking over certain things. But here, it was not a formal administrative agency, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. So the Congress wasn't involved, and so they don't have some of the power. But I think this is part of the ultimate scheme of consolidating power in the executive branch. And to me, that is a very scary thing, because that is not at all what our democracy is really about.
Of course, we know that the Trump administration has until tomorrow morning, I believe, to at least file an appeal. So we'll have to stay on top of what happens. All right. Whitney, thank you so much.